How we participate with the stories in which we wake up, to a large degree, comes from our cosmological understanding of the role of Saturn. If we see the world as separate, meaningless, material objects lacking intelligible purpose, then our suffering, pain, and dying are fundamentally stripped of their sanctity. Pain, suffering, and death become targets to conquer and control, to be avoided at all costs as meaningless and random acts of mechanicistic machine. Ironically, the worldview that tries to control life through domination gravely loses any sense of intelligible order for which it yearns most. Hello. Welcome to your weekly astrology forecast for March 2nd, 2020. This week is about trusting the process. My name is Shauna. I'm an astrologer and counselor in San Diego. And I'm excited to share with you the aspects of the astrology this week. One major component is, of course, Saturn. That was an essay called Revisioning Saturn. It was written by Jessica Garfield Cabarra, and it's in the Archive, the Journal of Archetypal Cosmology. So one of the major aspects that's happening this week is Venus-Saturn. So Venus is at the very last part of Aries, fire, cardinal signs. There's a lot of action. Venus is about relationships, how it is that we show up in relationships, what we're attracted to, and how we attract others into our life. And so Venus is making a square to Saturn, Saturn in Capricorn, also within the last degrees of Capricorn before it moves into Aquarius. I believe in March that's happening. So this combination, there is a more serious tone around relationships. We may be more focused on aligning our values within relationships. And so this is something to watch, I think, because Venus in the sign of Aries is more self-focused. Aries is the sign of individuation and individual self-focus. It's about me. It's about me making my stamp and presenting myself in the world and showing up in the beauty of me. So when Venus is in this sign already, we're talking about, okay, not necessarily how it is that you connect or compromise. It's more, the way I see it, it's more about how you show up in relationship. And Venus moving through the sign of Aries, we get to focus on, or we have gotten to focus on how it is that how you shows up, how that creates the relationship dynamics, like how you draw people in. So this can show up in just wanting to really have a more serious evaluation of your relationships. Sometimes it can show up as criticalness, the Venus-Saturn connection. I see that in natal charts when I do readings, where there is a more serious tone to relationship. Things move more slowly, and sometimes it can show up as there being kind of more of a critical or even judgmental tone. So I bring that up because I just want you to watch out for that. That can be something that you may experience in relationships this week, or you may simply feel that towards yourself. So just notice for that, that story that you're telling yourself this week, and I'll have more information in the tips for you. The cool thing that's happening is, so Venus is going to make this square to Saturn, and then it's going to move into the sign of Taurus shortly afterwards, which is fantastic for Venus because Venus is ruled by Taurus. So this means that there is more essential dignity. Venus is moving more in alignment with what we would consider natural tendencies of relationships and allure and beauty. So when this happens, Venus is also going to conjunct Uranus. So the way that I see this shaking out is that there is kind of like this moment of like internal crisis around like, oh my gosh, like is this what I want? Is this in alignment with my values? Or maybe there is a boundary that you want to draw, or a boundary that is presented to you. And it's kind of like a serious moment. And once that happens and is processed and integrated, or, once it's comes up, afterwards, there is this moment of insight. There is like this change that happens, because I say this because Uranus is about change and revolution. It's about this instantaneous, like, aha moment. And I see this as something being kind of like where maybe there is a challenge and then you make a change and then there's a settling, because Venus is settling into an entirely new sign of Taurus as she moves through the zodiac. That's not the only thing happening this week. The other thing happening is the Sun will conjunct Neptune this week. And so this is a really interesting transit, because I think it really depends on what your temperament is. So Sun is a symbol for the ego, the identity, what it is that you have as an individual to share with the world. The ancients also related it to the soul, spirit, energy, whatever that means for you. It is, the way I look at it is the energy that animates us, again, at a more individual level. And so Neptune is about the collective unconscious. It's about spirit realms. It's about the things that we can't see, but something greater. So this is an excellent transit that involves anything around inspiration or creativity, anything that feels like magical or intuitive. And it can also be a signal for where we are, where we get lost in illusion, or things can feel kind of murky. It's a great transit for any kind of creative work or any kind of spiritual work. It can also show where things are more challenging around practical, material world kind of events. So what I would say to channel this is to make sure that you're having a little more downtime this week, that you're doing meditative practices or spiritual practices, even if that's just going for a walk or going for a swim, doing something that connects you to your own energy can be very helpful. So I want to talk about the lunar cycle, but first I just want to mention that Mercury is still retrograde. It will station direct on Monday next week, so Monday the 9th. So I just want you to keep that in mind. This is the last week that we have where Mercury is retrograde, where there is this theme of thinking about things, reevaluating, especially where you have Pisces in your birth chart, where that is in relation to your ascendant, and then also where it is in relation to your natal Mercury as well. So still a week of like kind of contemplating and hashing things out and noticing where you're being called to reevaluate your own internal world, like your own internal processing system. And again, like the stories that you tell yourself. And I'm saying this because Mercury within the realm of Pisces is about how our internal dialogue, our internal set point, our dreams, our visions, our psyche, like how that constructs the world that we create around us, or what it is that shows up around us. So that's happening. As far as the lunar cycle, we're still in the waxing phase of the lunar cycle, and so this means that we're in an emotional state of growth and moving forward. So we have the first quarter moon that happens early in the week, Monday or Tuesday, depending on where you are in the world. This is happening at 12 degrees of Gemini. And so this is like a breakthrough, like a breakthrough of mental resistance is what I feel like. So I would pay attention how you're feeling earlier in the week. Whenever there's a quarter, or like whenever there's a lunation in general, it kind of is like a sort of a peak emotional experience. Some people feel this more than others. It really depends on what's happening in your life and just stress levels in general, I think, too. So I feel like there's going to be kind of this, like, maybe like there's an idea that you have or something that you're working through, and it's in the sign of Gemini. So it is more of a mental, thinking, logical kind of energy. So just notice Monday and Tuesday how you're feeling, and if there's any ideas that you have and things that you want to retool or change or restructure in order to move forward and take direction. That can be a great time when the first quarter moon is happening. Again, that's Monday and Tuesday this week. So I have some tips for you to make the most out of this. Tip number 1 is to give yourself a reality check. So I say that because Venus Saturn is all about reality checks. And so we have that happening where it's like when Saturn, especially when Saturn is in a hard aspect, like a square aspect to Venus, there is like something that needs to be looked at. There is a structure that needs to be looked at. Saturn is structure. It's the foundation of our lives. So I want you to notice, like, what is it that is coming up? Is there a thing that you know that you need to do that maybe you've been avoiding that may come up this week? So reality check yourself. Also, number 2, know that boundaries are a thing this week. So that is because Venus Saturn, but also because the Sun Neptune can show where boundaries soften, where we become very sensitive. People that have Sun Neptune, especially conjunct, but even like square or trine in their birth chart, they are extremely sensitive. They can really, they're like sensitive emotionally, but also like just to things like the sounds in the room, or like sense or taste, or just like being out in the world. They're more sensitive. So this is a gift because it helps you really tap into things. It's like highly creative, but it also means that you need more downtime, and it can be a great week to really practice taking extra good care of yourself through choosing to do more activities that are more nourishing and nurturing for you as much as you can. So that's tip number 2. Know that boundaries are a thing. And tip number 3 is to trust. Trust the process this week. I notice when people have a Saturn transit in my client work, when we're doing a reading or astrological counseling, Saturn transit in the birth chart is a more long-term situation. So we're talking about like just this week. This is kind of like a little blip. But even within a Saturn transit, something that's more long-term, it requires, or it asks us to have trust in the process. So I want you to have that in mind. Like, what is it that's happening now? What is it that you need to do in order to create a sustainable foundation for yourself? And I think this is important because we're talking about Venus Saturn, but also we're talking about the Sun Neptune combination. And Sun Neptune can provide situations where there's a lot of inspiration and where there's kind of like a magic in the air. And it can also, we can kind of like lose touch with what is practical. So I want you to have trust in like what is happening now for you, and how are you getting signals to move forward in a way that creates that strong and solid foundation. It's everything that's happening now is not forever. That is like the greatest gift that both Saturn and Neptune give us, is that things feel permanent, but they're not. But also you can't argue with reality. So that's a whole other side tangent. So that's tip number 3, is to trust your process. Alrighty. So now that you have those fun tips, let's pull a tarot card for you. So this is guidance for the week, unless you have a specific question that you would like to ask at this time. That is for you. And so as I'm shuffling these, I really am curious what's going on for you this week. What is your number one takeaway that you're going to implement in your life this week? Based on what's happening for you, like how are you going to, because I think we can talk about this stuff all day, but it's like at the end of the day, like what are you going to do with it? What symbols are really speaking to you, and what does that look like for you this coming week? Okay, so I pulled the Chariot card, and I pulled it reversed. So Chariot is about moving forward with a very, structure is not the right word, but like moving forward with having a plan. Like, not just like, I'm gonna go and like fly by the seat of my pants. It's like, yes, moving forward, but having this sense of clarity on the steps that you're taking to move forward. So just because it's reversed, it does not mean move forward. It just means that like this moving forward with a process, like with an action plan, I think is the right word. That's a thing this week. So I think this is very appropriate for the last week of Mercury retrograde while we're in the waxing phase of the moon. So I spoke about this a little bit last week, where there is this theme around moving forward this week, especially with Venus Saturn. I think that like there's something, and then the Venus going directly after that to make contact with Uranus, which is about change. So there's like change that is happening here. And I'm feeling like that it's reversed is like the process is maybe like slowed down a little bit, or maybe you would benefit from going back and like checking, okay, what is it that I'm moving towards? What steps am I taking to move forward? Or do I like not have an action plan? And maybe that's something that would be beneficial for you to really think about and sit with this week is Venus Saturn. Like, what do I value? And how am I aligning myself with actions to move towards what it is that I value most? So curious what comes up for you when you look at that. As always, I am available to work with people specifically around these issues, around boundaries and trust. That comes up a lot in the sessions that I do, whether that's readings or astrological counseling, because the people that I work with are tend to be highly sensitive people who are really just wanting to create more confidence and more resilience and more authentic connection in their lives. And so this is very Venus Saturn work as well. So if that's something that you are interested in working with, let me know. I would love to sit with you and assist in any way that I can. I'm wishing you a wonderful week, and I'll talk to you soon.